Greetings, TMOT back again. Sadly, folk, greater suffering is required. I was asked the question why I thought that people were not involved or engaged in what's taking place in this country, and why are all the civil rights leaders and freedom fighters gone. It's easy to answer those questions. There was greater suffering then. When there is suffering and people are agonizing over issues, they listen. It was easy for Martin Luther King to get people to understand and see what was going on. And I made a post. I talked about today versus civil rights, how there were those that were against Martin Luther King on both sides of the aisle when he did the march. And I don't mean necessarily or literally the aisles in DC, but the KKK and the Nation of Islam. Well, today they are the GOP and liberals, both sides of the aisle, not wanting people to take action or to rise up against what's going on because it threatens their motivations, and their motivations are greed and control. Whereas with the KKK, Nation of Islam at that time, it was hate. The civil rights leaders, the freedom fighters, they're dead because they stood up and they fought. And because they made a difference, they changed the room. Even though they died, the spilling of their blood made a difference, much like that of Jesus Christ. The spilling of his blood made a difference. I don't know what it is about blood. Sometimes blood sacrifice is required when you truly want to make a difference. That being said, I think we've got to get to a point to where there's greater suffering. Right now, there's just not a great suffering of the majority, and most folk are not engaged. We're more concerned about our football games, basketball games, and MTV and Gucci bags and things of that nature, to be bothered with the fact that we just had a piece of legislation that will screw the taxpayers. Several pieces, as a matter of fact. The building of the stadium here in Atlanta for the Falcons that taxpayers will pay for. Private organization will own it, and they'll keep all the profits. It'll be debt to myself and my children and yours. The stadium that's been approved by Cobb residents that they, and along with their children, will pay for. This legislation passed last night, a taxpayer-funded investment fund for a private entity will pay for. Nobody gets up in arms in that because there is not great suffering. But when it comes to bear upon your children, what was that saying in the Bible? The sins of the father are passed or visited upon his whole house. His children's children will suffer. I hate it, but that's just the way it is. And I guess when we get to that point, it'll require the spilling of blood to make a difference. I'll be honest, while I may reach some, I'm not reaching enough. And it may not be enough to make a difference because people are apathetic. They just don't care. They'd rather watch football. I'm not talking about everybody. I know there are people who care, who are out there daily, people fighting against things like Monsanto, the Federal Reserve. They're there. But the masses are simply not listening because there's not enough of a suffering amongst the people to make a difference. Be that as it may, it is what it is. T-Mod out. Drive time till next time.